Calista, and I'm joined by
Madam Adam
and
Huang.
Our topic today is about the differences between the left half and the right half of the brain. Traditionally, the right side of the brain is for creativity and changes in the environment. The right side is very thoughtful and can detect emotional features of people and how they talk. The left side is more logical and noticing the details with critical thinking and reasoning.
Well, I'm curious because why is there a need to split up those functions in two different sections of the brain? And it seems like the lower animals or the other animals, such as monkey, seem to have similar structure. So there must be some sort of nature's reasons to do that for some kind of optimization.
It's for survival. So the distinction between the two different sides of the brain isn't actually that much. You're not solely a right or a left side, but you can be more dominantly on both sides. So the left side is more noticing the details of the environment, and the right side is more the changes. So if you have the different types of people like that, it'll help you survive.
Do we know, are they structurally different between left and right, or it just as you grow up you store information differently, or is there like an intrinsic differences in the left side and right side's structures? Do we know about that?
The physical appearance is the same.
So what you're talking about here, that's an excellent comment, is the actual structure of the brain, which Calista did a really good job on actually dissecting the brain and showing us the parts of the brain. So when she got into the brain looked bilateral, meaning the same on both sides. What now we're talking about, though, is the thinking and the behavior that's coming, the differences in the thinking and the behavior. I like, John, what you said about evolutionary survival potential. I think that's a really good point to think about, that our brain slowly is selecting. We are finding through natural selection that the areas that we're using for our survival seem to be developing, as in the layers of the cortex. As we saw, the layers of the outer surface are very convoluted and have a lot of what are called gyri and sulci. Mammalian brains have this, but as, for example, a rat brain is far thinner in cortex layers than a human. So a lot of our evolutionary direction now seems to be going in increasing the cortex for higher thinking. Though mammals have a cortex, it seems like the ones that are developing more and more sophisticated cortex are the ones that seem to be going to the top of our evolutionary pile here.
So I also saw that usually the left hemisphere is for common and routine tasks. So that's why most people are right-handed, because the right side of the body is controlled by the left hemisphere. And then the right hemisphere responds quickly to dangerous stimuli. So that's why when we are immediately faced with something dangerous, then you shield with your left hand.
I think that's a very interesting point. I think that's a very, very interesting point. One thing that I might add to that, at some point in the past, I was at a very fascinating neuroanatomy discussion, and the presenter of the discussion actually said that the areas of the brain that control different functions, though the cortex looks somewhat the same on both sides, the cortical thickening will increase in areas that you use the most.
Going back to earlier, I think we read somewhere before that when the person loses a certain, for example, hearing, then your visual start to enlarge, and then that the area that used to be responsible for hearing start to shrink in its functions.
Because sometimes if somebody is like damaged on one side of the brain, then the function for that side may move to the other side. Or sometimes when your memory is stored somewhere and you zap it with an electrode, the memory can move somewhere else.
Well, I think both of your points are very fascinating and well taken, and something that in doing neural research is something we really have to think about, because the brain is supposed to be more complicated and difficult to understand than all of our universe because of the 100 billion interconnecting neurons that we're trying to study here. So I think, John, your point about wanting to localize and say this area covers this and that area covers that is very well backed up by what Calista just said, because sometimes the brain can compensate in fascinating ways, which is what you were talking about, Calista. And so who is to say what has happened in all of our embryological development, and then after we're born, then we're relating to the environment. So here we're trying to, without knowing basically the whole history of what that brain has been through, say this is the typical brain, when brains are influenced by their environment and what they've been exposed to. So here there are broad generalities I believe we can make safely, and that is the front. If you put your hand on your forehead, that's called what, Calista? Frontal. And if you put the back on the back hand, what do you call that?
Occipital.
Occipital. And if you put your hands in the middle of your head and you hang them down, we call that the
Parietal.
parietal. So these are really good, solid, basic things we can say, yes, this is what's going on. Frontal for higher thinking, occipital for seeing, temporal for hearing. But once we start getting into these tougher areas of saying, we all do this way, then we start getting in really kind of shaky ground.
Thank you for joining me, and use your brains, people.